My name is Rosemary Whitfield. I am 67 years old, a retired school librarian, and a widow. For decades, I gave my life to my family, believing that love and sacrifice would hold us together. I used to think of myself as the quiet foundation beneath everyone else's joy. But foundations can crack. And one winter afternoon, mine did. It happened in the kitchen. The kettle was hissing on the stove. Steam clouded my glasses. A sudden wave of dizziness struck me. My legs buckled and the linoleum floor rushed toward my face. The world spun and then went black. When the doctors arrived, they told me later, they called my daughter Carolyn. She never showed up. Instead, my son-in-law Ethan posted a smiling family picture online, taken right inside my old house. The caption read, "Finally, peace without trouble, Queen." Imagine lying in a hospital bed with heart monitors beeping, IVs dripping, and your chest aching, then looking down at your phone and seeing that the people you raised, the people you trusted, were celebrating your absence. Not worrying, not praying, celebrating. My heart hurt worse than my body. In that moment, I understood the cruel truth. I was not a mother or grandmother to them anymore. I was an inconvenience erased. When I collapsed at home, doctors called my daughter. She never showed up. Instead, my son-in-law mocked me online, saying, "Finally, peace without trouble, Queen." So I picked up the phone and sold the house they believed was theirs. Who looks foolish now? I stared at that cruel post for a long time. The smiling faces around my dining table, the chairs Robert and I bought together, the laughter of my granddaughter Maya captured mid-frame. My eyes fixed on the words, "Peace, trouble, Queen." As if my very existence was noise, as if I were nothing but clutter to be cleared away. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The woman they thought was weak and fading away was still here, still breathing, and she was done being erased. Lying in the hospital bed, I whispered to myself, almost too quietly to hear, "If I am their trouble queen, then let me cause real trouble, once and for all." When I was discharged, I refused to wait for anyone to pick me up. I signed my papers, walked out with my handbag pressed to my chest, and called a cab. On the ride back to my small apartment, the city lights flickered through the window, each glow a reminder that life could still change course. My phone felt heavy in my lap. For years, I had avoided confrontation. For years, I swallowed insults disguised as jokes. For years, I allowed myself to believe that patience would win me love. But now, love had been replaced with public humiliation. Patience had become permission. I unlocked the phone, scrolled to a number I had not dialed in years, and pressed call. The line clicked, and a familiar voice answered, "This is Helen Brooks." She sounded exactly as I remembered, sharp, efficient, unafraid. "Helen," I said, steady though my hands trembled, "this is Rosemary Whitfield. I want to sell the house on Cedar Street. Right now." There was a pause. Then Helen, who had seen me fight for library budgets, who had stood beside me during PTA fundraising wars, gave a little laugh. Well, I was wondering when you'd call." Her words filled the silence of the taxi like a secret pact. At last, I had spoken aloud the decision that would change everything. "So let me ask you, if you were me, lying in that hospital bed, watching your family rejoice over your absence, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent, waiting for scraps of kindness? Or would you have picked up the phone as I did, determined to take back what was rightfully yours? Before I go on, I want to thank you for being here, listening to my story. These stories matter because too many of us have been quietly erased by the very people we once held close. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, I invite you to stay with me until the end. And if my story speaks to you, consider joining this community. Subscribe, share your thoughts, let others know they are not alone. Because this is only the beginning. The real question is, would I truly sell the house my daughter believed was hers, the home filled with decades of memories? Or was this just the whisper of a broken heart seeking revenge? You will soon find out. When I think back to how it all began, I realize the unraveling of my life did not start in a hospital or with an online insult. It began 5 years ago, in the soft silence after Robert's funeral. My husband of 41 years had been my partner in every sense. Steady, kind, a man who believed laughter could carry us through anything. When he died, the house on Cedar Street, with its wide porch and creaking staircase, became unbearably quiet. I would walk through the rooms at night, touching the bookshelves he built, the chair where he read his newspaper, the corner where his guitar leaned against the wall. The echoes were heavy, and grief was a constant guest. Caroline noticed my loneliness, or at least she claimed she did. One evening, she arrived with Ethan and little Maya. They brought dinner in takeout boxes and sat with me on the porch. Caroline slipped her hand into mine. "Mom," she said, "you shouldn't be here all alone. It's not healthy." Ethan nodded solemnly. "A big house like this is too much for you to manage. Why not let us move in just for a while? We can help with the bills, keep you company, and Maya would love to grow up here." Maya, only 6 at the time, danced across the lawn chasing fireflies. Her laughter cut through my grief like sunlight after rain. When she called out, "Grandma, come see!" my heart swelled. In that moment, the offer seemed like a blessing. I told myself Robert would have wanted me surrounded by family, not silence. I agreed. At first, it was wonderful. Mornings began with Maya climbing into my bed, her small hands tugging at my sleeve. "Wake up, Grandma, pancakes!" Caroline cooked, Ethan mowed the lawn, and for a brief season, the house felt alive again. We ate dinners together at the long oak table, the same one where Robert once carved the Sunday roast. For a time, I believed my loneliness had been cured, but slowly things shifted. Subtly, at first. Caroline suggested I take the smaller bedroom upstairs so Maya could have the master suite. "She needs the space, Mom," she explained. "It will make her feel stable." I wanted stability for Maya, so I moved. Soon after, Caroline replaced the curtains Robert and I had chosen with ones she preferred. She painted over the wallpaper we had picked out in the 80s. "It's too dated," she said, laughing. I smiled along, but inside I felt something precious being erased. Months passed, and I began to notice my belongings disappearing. A lamp here, a quilt there. Caroline explained they were in storage. Ethan said he donated a few things I didn't really need. My voice grew quieter each time I tried to protest. Eventually, Caroline suggested it would be easier if I rented a small apartment nearby. "Just temporary, Mom," she promised. "Until we save enough for our own house, we'll take care of Cedar Street and you can rest." I told myself it was only for a year. I told myself they needed it more than I did. I told myself family sacrifice was what love looked like. So I packed my clothes, my teacups, and a few photo albums. I left behind Robert's guitar, the bookshelves he built, the rooms where we dreamed our life together. I moved into a cramped one-bedroom across town. At night, I could almost hear the echo of their laughter drifting from Cedar Street, though I was no longer part of it. The visits grew less frequent. I would call and sometimes get no answer. When I did stop by, the house looked less and less like mine. Ethan sat at the head of the dining table, Caroline beside him, and Maya running circles in the backyard. They looked like a family, and I felt like a guest. Once during dinner, Ethan joked, "Careful, Rosemary, don't break the plates, they're expensive." Everyone laughed. I laughed too, but the sting lingered. The final push came on a Sunday afternoon. Caroline walked me to the door of my apartment after a short visit. She glanced around at the peeling paint and the narrow hallway. "It's cozy," she said too brightly. "You'll be comfortable here." Then she kissed my cheek and left. I stood in that dim apartment, staring at the ceiling, and realized what had happened. I had given up my home for them. I had surrendered the rooms Robert and I built together. In return, I had been reduced to an afterthought, tucked away like an old photograph. I had believed their words, believed their promises of family and togetherness, but each step had moved me further into invisibility. Sitting here now, I can admit what I could not admit then. I thought they loved me. I thought they wanted me near. But in truth, they were slowly, carefully, making me disappear. I remember one evening standing in the small kitchen of my apartment boiling water for tea. The walls were stained from years of renters before me. The single window rattled in the wind. I looked down at my teacup, chipped on the rim, and whispered to myself, "Is this all I have left?" The air was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that presses on your chest. For the first time, I saw the truth without excuses. Caroline and Ethan had not moved in to help me. They had moved in to replace me. Now, as I sit here, recalling those nights in that shabby apartment, I ask myself the question that haunted me then. Was this the life Robert wanted for me? Was this the ending of all our years together? I stared at the cracked ceiling, the weak glow of the lamp casting shadows on peeling paint, and I wondered, almost aloud, is this the rest of my life? Is this the future I must accept? The week after my collapse, Helen arrived at my apartment. She carried her familiar leather briefcase, worn smooth from decades of work, and behind her came a woman I had never met. The stranger extended her hand with quiet confidence. "Patricia O'Connor," she said, "attorney at law." Helen gave me a look that was both gentle and firm. "Rosemary, you need more than a real estate agent right now. You need someone who understands the law. Patricia is the best I know." We sat around my tiny kitchen table. The surface wobbled when Patricia set down a thick folder. My hands tightened on my teacup. Something about the weight of that folder frightened me more than any hospital monitor had. Patricia opened it slowly, like unveiling a secret. She slid a few documents toward me. "These are credit card accounts," she explained. "Opened under your name. The mailing address for every one of them is Cedar Street." I frowned, trying to understand. "I haven't opened any new accounts in years." Her eyes were steady. "I know. That's why this is a problem. There are 6 cards, all active. Purchases in your name. Paid with funds routed from accounts I can almost guarantee belong to your daughter and her husband." Helen leaned closer. "Rosemary, they've been living off your credit, and if you don't act, you'll be left holding the debt." I felt my throat tighten. Debt? I thought the house was paid off. Robert and I worked for decades to make sure of that. Patricia nodded. "The mortgage is clear, but they used your identity for more than credit cards. There are personal loans as well, tens of thousands of dollars, and—" She hesitated, flipping further into the folder. "There's something even more serious." She pulled out a packet with legal letterhead. The title at the top froze me, Petition for Conservatorship. I touched the page with trembling fingers. "What does this mean?" Patricia's voice was calm but carried the weight of urgency. "It means they were preparing to go to court to have you declared legally incompetent. If granted, Caroline and Ethan would have control over your finances, your medical decisions, even where you live. You would become a ward of your own daughter." The words pierced deeper than any insult. I sat back, stunned, my palms cold. I whispered, half to myself, half to the room, "They don't just want the house. They want my whole life." For a long moment, no one spoke. The ticking of the clock above the stove filled the silence, marking each second like a hammer on stone. Memories flashed in my mind. Robert and I saving carefully for retirement, clipping coupons together at the kitchen table, laughing over small victories. All of it was meant to secure a future of dignity. And now, my own flesh and blood was plotting to strip me of every right I had left. I forced myself to look at Patricia. How close are they? She flipped to the final page. The petition hasn't been filed yet, but drafts are prepared. They've gathered supporting statements, claims that you've been forgetful, unstable, unable to manage your own affairs. I felt my chest tighten. Forgetful? Unstable? I'm the one who kept that house running for 40 years. I'm the one who paid every bill on time. How dare they? My voice broke, anger and grief twisting together. Patricia's eyes softened. I know, but the law doesn't always look at the past. It looks at what is presented now, and they've been building a case. Social isolation, financial control. The narrative they are creating paints you as vulnerable, confused, in need of guardianship. Helen reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. Rosemary, this is why I brought Patricia. You can't face this alone. We need to move quickly, before they take the next step. I stared at the documents again, my name printed at the top, bold and cold, my signature forged at the bottom of loan agreements, charges for vacations I never took, jewelry I never wore, dinners I was never invited to. The betrayal cut deeper with each page. Why? I whispered. Why would Caroline do this? I gave her everything. I let them move in. I stepped aside. My voice cracked. I thought I was helping. Patricia did not answer with comfort. She answered with clarity. Because people who want control rarely stop at gratitude. They stop only when they have taken everything they can. Tears stung my eyes, but I did not let them fall. I pressed my palms flat on the table to stop the trembling. In that moment, grief gave way to something else. Not rage, not even hatred, but resolve. They think I'm invisible, I said softly. They think they can erase me. I lifted my head, meeting Patricia's gaze. What do I need to do? Her reply was sharp, decisive. Document everything, protect your assets, and prepare for a fight. If you do not act immediately, they will strip away not only your property, but your name, your choices, your freedom. The word freedom echoed in my mind. I had lived my life believing freedom was guaranteed, that as long as I paid my bills, lived honorably, raised my daughter, I would be safe. But now I saw the truth. Safety could be stolen by the very hands you once trusted. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I closed the folder slowly, the paper edges cutting into my skin. My hands would not stop shaking. For a moment, I let them tremble openly, no longer hiding my fear. Then, with deliberate care, I folded my fingers together and stilled them. I thought of Robert. What would he say if he were here? He would remind me of the night we faced foreclosure in the early years, when we fought side by side to keep the house. He would say, "You are stronger than you know, Rosie." And I realized he was right. I lifted my chin. All right, we fight. Helen gave a satisfied nod, and Patricia closed her folder with a decisive snap. But before leaving, Patricia leaned closer. Her voice was low, carrying the weight of truth. Rosemary, listen carefully. If you do not act now, if you let them move one step further, they will take more than your house. They will take your very identity, your freedom, your life as you know it. The words hung in the air, cold and heavy. My breath caught. I realized the battle had already begun. The folder with Patricia's evidence was still sitting on my kitchen table when the phone rang. I stared at the screen. Caroline's name flashed across it, bright and insistent. For a moment, I considered letting it ring. But some part of me wanted to hear her voice, to know whether she would sound ashamed or defiant or something else entirely. I pressed accept. "Mom," she began, her voice sharp, almost frantic, "there's some crazy woman calling us saying she's your listing agent. She claims you're selling Cedar Street. Please tell me this is some kind of mistake." I held the phone away for a moment, long enough to steady my breath. Then I lifted my teacup, sipped slowly, and answered with all the calm I could summon. "It is not a mistake, Caroline. I hired her. I am selling the house." Silence. Heavy, shocked silence. I could almost hear the static of her disbelief on the line. Finally, Caroline burst out, "You can't do that. That house is ours. We've lived there for years. We've paid for improvements. I interrupted, my voice even. "No, Caroline, you lived there. You enjoyed it. But it has never been yours. It has always been mine. And now it will belong to someone else." The quiet that followed was louder than any scream. I pictured her standing in my old kitchen, gripping the phone, her face twisting with outrage. For years, I had been the one swallowing silence. This time, I let the silence do the work for me. When she finally spoke again, her voice was sharp as glass. "Mom, you're being unreasonable. Think of Maya. This is her home. You can't just rip it away. Families don't do this to each other." I leaned back in my chair. Families also don't abandon their mothers in hospitals while they celebrate online. Families don't open credit cards in someone else's name. Families don't plan to declare their own mother incompetent so they can seize everything she owns. Her gasp was audible. "You don't understand. Ethan explained everything." And then, just as I expected, his voice broke in from the background. He had been listening the whole time. "Rosemary," Ethan said smoothly, his tone low and practiced, "you're making a terrible mistake. Selling that house will only hurt all of us. And frankly, it won't work. We have legal rights here. You'll regret this." I closed my eyes, picturing him at my dining table, the head of the household he had slowly claimed for himself. Always confident, always so sure he could control the narrative. My grip tightened on the teacup, but my voice did not shake. "Legal rights?" I repeated softly. "You mean the forged loans? The conservatorship papers you drafted in secret? Tell me, Ethan, which of those rights will stand up in court?" The line went quiet again. The silence this time was not shock. It was calculation. I could hear him thinking, searching for the right tactic, the right lie. At last his voice returned, colder now. "You're old, Rosemary. You're confused. No judge will believe you. All anyone has to do is look at the way you've been living, alone in that sad little apartment. You think this makes you strong, but it just proves you need guidance. And when this is over, when the law is on our side, you'll be the one begging us for help." I let his words hang in the air. For years, I might have flinched, cried, begged them to reconsider. But not now, not after Patricia's folder, not after that social media post that stripped me of dignity while I lay in a hospital bed. I drew in a breath, slow and steady. "Ethan," I said, "you mistake silence for weakness. You mistake patience for confusion. But I see you now, I see both of you, and I will not disappear quietly." Caroline's voice returned, shrill with panic. "Mom, listen to yourself. You're destroying this family, all because of a misunderstanding. Just stop this now before it's too late." I set my teacup gently on the table. The sound of porcelain against wood was small, but in that moment it felt like a gavel striking. "No, Caroline, I am not destroying this family. You already did that when you chose greed over love." The line fell silent once more. I could hear the faint sound of Maya's laughter in the background, unaware of the storm raging around her. For her sake, I almost softened. Almost. But then I remembered the petition, the forged signatures, the photo caption mocking my very existence. My voice lowered, deliberate and final. "You believe you can frighten me with threats of law. But I have seen the evidence, and I am prepared to fight. If you think you can take my name, my freedom, my life, then by all means, try." For several seconds, there was nothing but static. Then Ethan spoke, his words a hiss. "You'll regret this, Rosemary. You'll regret it more than you know." I lifted the phone closer so they could hear every syllable. "Haven't you learned by now? Regret belongs to those who betray, not to those who finally stand up." I ended the call before they could answer. The silence in my apartment was thick, but for the first time in years, it was not suffocating. It was mine. I looked down at my tea, now cold in its cup, and whispered the only words left. Go ahead. Try 2 days after that phone call, I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the cold remains of tea in my cup, when a soft knock echoed at my apartment door. It was timid, almost apologetic, as if the knocker wasn't sure they belonged there. I rose slowly, my bones aching, and opened the door. There she stood, Maya, my granddaughter. 11 years old, her small hands gripping the handle of a scuffed pink suitcase. Her eyes were swollen and red, her cheeks blotchy from tears. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and hope, and before she spoke, I already knew something was terribly wrong. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice trembling, "can I stay with you?" I blinked, trying to steady my breath. "Of course, sweetheart, but why are you here alone?" She glanced over her shoulder down the hallway as if expecting someone to follow, but there was no one, only the faint hum of the elevator in the distance. Finally, she said, "Mom and Dad told me to come. They said, if I stayed with you for a while, maybe you would change your mind. Maybe you'd remember we're family." Her words cut deeper than any threat Ethan had made. They had sent their daughter, my granddaughter, as a weapon, a messenger in their battle. I took her suitcase and set it aside, then pulled her into my arms. Her body felt fragile, her heart racing against my chest. I stroked her hair and whispered, "You are safe here, Maya. You are always safe with me." She clung tighter, as if afraid I might vanish like so many promises before. After a few minutes, I led her to the couch, wrapped her in the old quilt Robert and I once used on chilly nights, and poured her a cup of cocoa. She held it carefully, blowing on the steam, her eyes darting between me and the floor. "Maya," I said softly, "did your parents tell you why they wanted you to come here?" She nodded hesitantly. "They said you were mad at them, that you wanted to make us move. They said maybe if I stayed here, you'd think about how much you'd miss me and you wouldn't sell the house." I closed my eyes for a moment, swallowing the ache rising in my throat. Even now, they were twisting her into leverage, a pawn in their game. "Maya," I asked gently, "can I ask you something? Last Christmas, where were you?" Her gaze shifted, uneasy. She bit her lip before answering. "I stayed at Sarah's house. You know, my friend from school. Her parents had me for the week." I leaned forward. "Why didn't you spend Christmas with your mom and dad?" Her voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "They said they had to go to Florida to visit sick relatives. They told me I couldn't go because I might catch something, but..." She hesitated, then looked up at me, her eyes filled with confusion. "Grandma, I never saw any sick relatives. When they came back, they had suntans. They said it was from being outside a lot, but Sarah's mom showed me pictures later, from the internet. Mom and Dad were on the beach, at a hotel. For Christmas, the room spun. My chest tightened as if my heart were breaking all over again. They hadn't just abandoned me. They had abandoned her, too. Left their daughter behind while they drank cocktails under the Florida sun, funded by credit cards with my name on them. I pulled her into my arms once more, unable to hold back the tears that slipped silently down my cheeks. My voice shook as I whispered into her hair, "They didn't just betray me, Maya. They betrayed you too. They left you behind." She sniffled, her small arms wrapping tighter around my waist. "Grandma, I don't understand. Why don't they want me with them? Why don't they want you?" The question pierced me, sharp and merciless. How do you explain to a child that sometimes the people who should love you the most choose selfishness instead? I held her and whispered the only truth I knew. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault. They are making choices that are wrong. But you are loved. You are wanted. You are mine. We sat like that for a long time, the clock ticking on the wall, the world outside moving without us. I realized then that my battle was no longer only about property or dignity or my own survival. It was about this child, this innocent girl caught in the crossfire. She deserved better. She deserved truth. She deserved stability and safety. I wiped my cheeks and pulled back to look her in the eyes. "Maya," I said firmly, "you will never be abandoned here. You will never be unwanted here. Whatever happens, you will always have a home with me." She looked at me as if weighing my words, searching for cracks, for the lies she had learned to expect. Then slowly her shoulders relaxed. She believed me. That night I set up the small guest bed with fresh sheets. I tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and watched as sleep finally carried her away. Her face in rest was so peaceful, so untouched by the storms that surrounded her. It reminded me of Caroline when she was small, before the hunger for control, before the distance grew between us. For a fleeting moment, grief and memory blended until I could hardly breathe. I stepped back into the kitchen, staring at the dim light above the stove. My heart was heavy, but for the first time in years, it was also clear. This was no longer about whether I could forgive Caroline and Ethan. This was about protecting Maya, body and soul. The folder on the table, the forged loans, the petition for conservatorship, those were evidence of betrayal. But Maya asleep in my home was evidence of hope. And I knew with unshakable certainty that I would fight for her with everything I had left. I whispered to the stillness. Words meant as much for myself as for her. "You will never have to fear losing a home again, my darling. Not while I'm alive." The next morning, Patricia returned. Helen came with her, carrying a fresh folder, thicker than the last one. Maya was still asleep in the guest room, curled beneath the quilt, her breathing soft and steady. I prayed she would stay that way, shielded a little longer from the ugliness waiting in the kitchen. Patricia sat across from me, sliding the folder onto the table with the precision of a surgeon preparing her instruments. "Rosemary," she said carefully, "I need you to see what we've uncovered." I braced myself, though no amount of bracing could prepare me for what lay inside. The first pages were receipts. Thousands of dollars spent on jewelry, bracelets, earrings, a necklace with diamonds that sparkled in the glossy print of the store invoice. My name was listed on every purchase, bold and undeniable. Patricia turned the page. "Spa treatments," she explained. "Monthly visits, high-end packages, massages, facials, full body wraps, all charged to accounts under your identity." I stared at the invoices, the numbers blurring before my eyes. I had lived simply since Robert's passing, clipping coupons for groceries, hesitating to buy a new pair of shoes. And yet somewhere across town, Caroline and Ethan had been indulging themselves in luxuries bought with my credit. The next set of documents showed airline tickets, hotel bookings, restaurant bills. This, Patricia said, tapping the papers, was their Florida trip. December over Christmas week, all-inclusive resort, $8,000 total, billed directly to a card in your name. My chest tightened, the room spinning for a moment. Maya's words from the night before echoed painfully in my mind. Suntans, beaches, the lies about sick relatives. I felt my throat burn. "They left her behind," I whispered. "They left their own child behind and paid for their holiday with my name." Patricia's face was grave. "Yes, and there is more." She turned to the final section of the folder. Printed emails, highlighted lines. I scanned them quickly, but one subject line froze me. Evidence of mental decline. My hand trembled as I read Ethan's words to another attorney. "We are collecting examples of Rosemary's confusion. She forgets dates, repeats questions, and seems incapable of handling her finances. We can document these patterns to strengthen the petition. Attached notes described moments twisted out of context, times I had asked for reminders, times I had repeated a story out of nostalgia. To Ethan, they became proof. To me, they were fragments of ordinary aging, nothing more. My voice broke as I whispered, "Even my sanity. They want to bury that too." Patricia leaned forward, her expression fierce. "Yes, they are trying to build a false narrative. That is how conservatorship cases are won, by convincing a court the person is incapable of self-care. They are preparing to strip you not just of property, but of identity." I pressed my hands flat against the table, trying to stop the trembling that had spread through my whole body. I had faced grief, loneliness, even humiliation. But this was different. This was erasure. They were not content with taking my home or my money. They wanted to erase me from my own story, rewrite me as a fragile shadow in need of rescue. The anger rose slowly, steady as a tide. I thought of Robert again, how he trusted me to manage our affairs, how he once said, "Rosie, you're the strongest woman I know." I thought of Maya, asleep in the next room, depending on me to be the shield her parents refused to be. I straightened my back. My voice was low but certain. If they think they can silence me with lies, they are wrong. Helen reached over, her hand warm on mine. "That's the Rosemary I remember." Patricia closed the folder, her eyes locked on mine. "Then you must be ready, because if we don't fight, they will succeed. They will convince a judge that you are incompetent. They will take the house, the accounts, the decisions, and eventually even custody of Maya. Do you understand?" The thought was unbearable. Maya, torn from me, placed back into the care of parents who used her as a pawn and abandoned her at Christmas. My chest ached, but my voice was steady. "We can't let that happen." Patricia nodded firmly. "Good, then we begin. We will document everything. Your bills, your accounts, your medical records, proof of your competence. We will collect testimony from neighbors, friends, anyone who has seen you live independently. We will build the real story to stand against their lies." I exhaled slowly, my hands finally still. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt clarity. The fear was still there, sharp and cold, but it no longer ruled me. "Patricia," I said, lifting my chin, "what do we do next?" She held my gaze, her voice resolute. "We take them to court." The first sound you would hear, if you were sitting where I sat, was the crack of a gavel cutting through whispers. I stood with Patricia at my side. Helen sat behind us. My palms were damp, but my back was straight. I fixed my eyes on the seal above the bench. I could hear shoes scuffing, the faint rattle of chains on the gallery rail, the distant cough of an old vent. "Case number 19-447, the clerk announced. Paper rustled. A microphone hummed. The prosecutor rose and read the charges. His voice was patient and precise. Financial fraud, identity theft, misuse of credit instruments, contributory child neglect. Dates and sums. Each word struck like a small hammer. Every line added weight to my chest. Every number felt like a digit carved into bone. Caroline and Ethan stood at their table with their attorney. I did not look at their faces. I looked down at my teacup hands and thought of Maya asleep in my guest room the night before. I thought of Robert building bookshelves. I thought of the promise I whispered when Patricia said we would fight. Then I raised my head and breathed. The judge asked if there were preliminary motions. Their attorney spoke first. His tone had the syrup of concern poured over steel. "Your Honor, the respondents acted out of care. The mother has displayed recent confusion and lapses. My clients sought guidance from counsel and medical professionals to protect her well-being." He spread his hands. "This is a family matter, not a criminal one." Patricia waited for silence before she stood. "Your Honor, the evidence will show a calculated campaign to strip a competent woman of her property, her name, and her autonomy. We will present forged signatures on loan applications, active credit cards opened in Mrs. Whitfield's name using the Cedar Street address, and expenditures having nothing to do with her care. She placed a binder on the lectern. We will also introduce evidence regarding the minor child. The judge nodded once. Proceed. The prosecutor called a representative from the bank. He described how applications were submitted, how accounts were verified using the Cedar Street address, how payments originated from a joint account held by Caroline and Ethan. Screens displayed magnified copies of statements and applications. My name stared back at me. Then came the manager from the jewelry boutique. She testified to purchases in my name, a diamond necklace, a gold bracelet, dates that matched statements I had never seen because my mail was redirected. Patricia leaned toward me. "You are doing well," she whispered. "Breathe." When it was our turn, Patricia guided the narrative the way a careful hand guides a boat through rough water. She offered the screenshot of Ethan's post taken inside my dining room. The caption filled the screen in harsh letters. "Finally, peace without trouble, Queen." The words needed no commentary. Patricia called me to the stand. My oath sounded small in the large room. I told the court about the afternoon I collapsed, about the monitors, about waiting for a daughter who did not come while laughter filled my house without me. I kept my answers spare. Yes, I have lived independently for years. I pay my bills. I manage my medications. I drive myself to appointments. No, I did not authorize any loans or new cards. When the defense suggested I confuse dates, I replied by naming the due day of each utility, my pharmacy refill schedule, and the exact amount of my rent. The defense sat down. Patricia called Maya. The bailiff adjusted the microphone and asked her to speak clearly. She nodded once and stood on tiptoe. My heart clenched. She wore a navy dress and held the rail with both hands. Her voice was small but steady. On Christmas, I stayed at my friend Sarah's house for a week. Mom and Dad said they needed to care for sick relatives. When they came back, they were tan. Patricia asked one more question. "Did you later see photographs of your parents in Florida during that week?" Maya nodded. "Yes, on the beach." Caroline began to cry. "We only wanted Mother to be safe," she said suddenly, rising to her feet. Tears streaked her cheeks. "She forgets things. We were trying to help." Patricia turned a single page. "Your Honor, I move to admit email correspondence between Respondent Ethan Whitfield and outside counsel. Subject line, evidence of mental decline." The exhibit appeared on the screen. Ethan's words glowed under the highlighter. "We are collecting examples of Rosemary's confusion. We can document these patterns to strengthen the petition." The judge looked at the defense table. "Counsel?" Their attorney stood again. "Your Honor, families often consider guardianship when a loved one shows signs of decline. Any correspondence reflects concern, not malice." Patricia's voice was mild. "Concern does not explain resorts paid for with fraudulent credit. Concern does not explain jewelry purchases in the victim's name. Concern does not explain public ridicule of a hospitalized elder. This is exploitation under the mask of care." Silence returned, the thick kind that closes doors. I felt my breath settle into resolve. I thought of the chipped teacup in my kitchen. I thought of the promise I made to Maya. Whatever the outcome, I had spoken. I had stood in the place where truth is weighed. The judge folded his hands. "I have heard enough for today." He glanced down at notes, then back to us. His voice, when it came, was level and spare. The room held its breath. He addressed Caroline and Ethan first. "The court finds probable cause to proceed on charges." He turned a page. "The evidence supports allegations of financial fraud and child neglect. Bail conditions will include no unauthorized access to the petitioner's financial records and no contact with the minor outside supervised visitation." I closed my eyes, one breath of relief, then opened them again to watch the moment settle like snow. The judge shifted his gaze to me. As to the immediate welfare of the child, the court must act to protect stability. He lifted the gavel. It hovered for a heartbeat, quietly. Then he spoke, and the words rang through the room like a bell at dawn. Caroline and Ethan are charged with financial fraud and child neglect. Temporary guardianship of Maya is awarded to Mrs. Rosemary Whitfield. When the gavel struck and the judge pronounced his ruling, the courtroom seemed to exhale. Papers rustled, footsteps echoed, and voices murmured around me. But inside my chest there was no victory, only silence, heavy and hollow. I had won, they said. Guardianship of Maya was mine. Caroline and Ethan were facing charges. But as the words settled, what filled me was not triumph. It was grief. This was my daughter. The baby I once carried on my hip. The child I soothed to sleep with lullabies when thunderstorms rattled the windows. I remembered her small body curled against me, her hair damp with summer sweat, her little voice whispering, "Sing again, Mama." And I did, over and over, until she drifted into dreams. Now that same daughter sat across from me in court, accused of stealing, of neglecting her own child, of mocking me in public. And I, her mother, was fighting her for custody of my granddaughter. The ache of it was almost unbearable. As the bailiff guided Maya toward me, I felt torn between two lives. In one, I was still Caroline's mother, desperate to shield her, desperate to see her turn back from this ruin. In the other, I was Maya's protector, called to stand where Caroline would not, to hold the line she had abandoned. I thought of Robert, long gone. What would he say, seeing his daughter in chains of her own making? What would he feel, knowing his wife had to step into a role that should never have been hers, to raise a grandchild as her own, because her child could not be trusted? The moral weight pressed down. Was I betraying my duty as a mother by standing against Caroline? Or was I fulfilling it by protecting the innocent she had left behind? The questions tore through me, sharp as glass. If I had been a better mother, would Caroline have chosen differently? Had I failed her somehow, in ways I could never repair? Each thought was a blade, cutting through the fragile skin of resolve. I looked at Caroline then. She was weeping, mascara smudged, her head bowed. For a moment, my heart lurched toward her. I wanted to run to her, to hold her as I once did, to tell her that no matter what she had done, she was still mine, that some part of me would always love her. But then I remembered Maya's voice the night she arrived at my door. "Why don't they want me, Grandma?" That question had no answer. It had only consequences. I realized in that instant that love, without responsibility, becomes poison. Caroline's choices had already answered for her. She had chosen herself. She had chosen silence where a mother should speak. She had chosen comfort where a mother should sacrifice. And now I had to choose too, between holding on to the daughter who betrayed me or protecting the granddaughter who still believed in me. My hands trembled as I reached for Maya's. She looked up at me with wide eyes, searching, uncertain, afraid. She needed to know where she belonged. She needed to know someone had chosen her without condition, without betrayal. I squeezed her hand, and in that moment clarity rose through the grief. I had not stopped being Caroline's mother. I never could. But I had become something else too. The last shield between Maya and the storm. I spoke softly, though my voice was steady enough for the walls themselves to hear. I never wanted this. I never wanted to stand against my own child, but I no longer have a choice. To protect Maya, I must stand. The words were not loud, yet they echoed inside me, carrying the weight of finality. I thought again of lullabies. Once they had bound me to Caroline. Now perhaps they would bind me to Maya. The song was different, but the need was the same. A child reaching for safety, for belonging, for love. Around us, the courtroom emptied. Attorneys gathered their files. The judge left the bench. Caroline wept in silence while Ethan whispered furiously to his lawyer. But all of it faded to a blur. The only reality was the small hand in mine, fragile yet warm, trusting me in ways her parents had failed her. I lifted my chin and drew in a breath. The ache of motherhood betrayed did not vanish. It would never vanish. But beneath it, a new resolve took root. I turned to Maya, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and whispered, "You are safe now. You are mine to protect." Her eyes filled, though she did not cry. Instead, she leaned her forehead against my arm and nodded. In that moment, I knew what Robert would say. He would say that sometimes love demands impossible choices, that sometimes, to keep one promise, another must be broken, and that real strength lies not in holding on, but in letting go when holding on destroys what is left. I closed my eyes for just a second, letting the grief wash through me. Then I opened them again, sharper, clearer, steadier, because the truth was simple. I could mourn my daughter, but I could not sacrifice my granddaughter. I looked at Maya, my voice quiet but certain. I no longer have a choice but to protect you. In the days following the judge's ruling, the courtroom no longer felt like the only battlefield. The consequences spilled into every corner of life, both legal and social. For Caroline and Ethan, the gavel had already fallen, but the echoes were only beginning to spread. They tried, at first, to control the narrative. Caroline posted on social media with trembling words over a photo of Maya's baby blanket. "My mother is paranoid. Please pray for our family." Ethan wrote a long thread about responsible guardianship, insisting they had consulted experts, that they were merely protecting me from confusion. They wrapped their lies in language of care, hoping sympathy could cover the cracks. But the internet had already seen the filings. Court records are public, and the story moved faster than they could manage. The petition for conservatorship, Ethan's emails requesting evidence of mental decline, the credit card statements with vacations and jewelry, all of it spread online. People posted the screenshot of his cruel caption, "Finally, peace without trouble, Queen." That one line undid every claim of love. At first, some old friends of Caroline defended her. "Grief changes people," one wrote. Maybe Rosemary misunderstood. But within hours, others countered with links to the judgment. Neighbors wrote comments about seeing me mow my lawn last summer, drive myself to choir rehearsals, pay bills at the bank with clarity. Their voices painted a different picture, one of competence, not confusion. The legal system did not pause either. Ethan was placed under bond conditions, no access to any financial accounts, no contact with banks, and travel restrictions until the criminal trial. Caroline was ordered into mandatory parenting classes and supervised visitation with Maya. Both were officially charged: financial fraud, identity theft, and child neglect. The words sounded heavy in the clerk's announcements, but they weighed heavier still in the silence that followed. For the first time, it wasn't me under suspicion. It was them. Caroline tried to soften her image with a video filmed inside my old kitchen. She wore one of my sweaters and held a mug I once loved, saying softly, "I only wanted my mother safe. Everything else is misunderstanding." The video looked polished, but the comments cut through. Someone posted, "Is abandoning your child at Christmas a misunderstanding too?" Another attached the resort receipt in my name, alongside photos of Caroline smiling on a Florida beach. Ethan fared no better. Cameras caught him outside the courthouse, jaw locked, as reporters pressed him. "Mr. Whitfield," one asked, "how do you justify leaving your daughter with friends while you vacationed in Florida on your mother-in-law's credit?" He tried to speak about stress and family privacy, but his lawyer pulled him away, muttering, "No comment." The clip aired on local news that evening, and in the neighborhood around Cedar Street, silence grew louder than words. The same neighbors who once waved at Caroline when she walked Maya to school now crossed the street. The grocery store cashier who used to ask about their family rang up their items with curt efficiency, avoiding eye contact. Even relatives who once doubted me stopped calling them. One cousin sent me 3 words that meant more than an essay. I was wrong. The house itself was no longer theirs to claim. Helen finalized the sale, handing keys to a young couple with twin toddlers. A neighborhood blog posted, "New family starts on Cedar Street." I stared at the photo of the porch, both saddened and relieved. That chapter was closed, and no performance online could reopen it. Still, the most striking image burned itself into memory the following week. Patricia and I were waiting outside the courthouse for a procedural hearing when Ethan walked out with his attorney. His suit was neat, his face cold, but no one moved toward him. Cameras were present, but smaller in number now. A reporter who had once taken his words at face value kept her eyes on her notes. A deputy turned his back. Even the pigeons on the railing seemed indifferent. Ethan scanned the plaza as if searching for allies. None came. He adjusted his tie, his jaw clenched harder, and he walked toward the curb where a car waited. Not a hand lifted in greeting. Not a neighbor called his name. For a man who had spent years projecting control, it was the first time I saw him truly alone. Caroline was no better off. I heard from Patricia that she had tried to attend a family gathering on her side, only to find the door coolly closed. "Until you face what you've done," her aunt told her, "you are not welcome here." Caroline wept on a phone call that leaked into my voicemail, insisting I had destroyed her life. But all I heard was the echo of her choices finally answering back. That night, Maya sat at my table scribbling homework. She looked up and asked, "Grandma, why does everyone believe you now?" I thought for a long moment, then said, "Because the truth, Maya, has patience." Lies run fast, but truth walks steady, and in the end, it always arrives. She nodded and wrote a star in the corner of her paper, the way children mark a task complete. I went to bed that night with a strange mix of sorrow and release. I had not wanted this outcome. I had wanted a family whole. But choices create consequences, and for the first time, Caroline and Ethan were standing in the shadow of their own. As I closed my eyes, one thought circled through me. Perhaps for years they painted me as the trouble queen, the burden, the obstacle. But now, stripped of pretense, standing in courts and in silence from neighbors, they had inherited the title they once gave me. For the first time, it was they who were seen as the trouble. When Helen handed me the envelope, her eyes carried both satisfaction and sorrow. $400,000, she said, sliding the check across my kitchen table. "Minus closing costs, it is yours, Rosemary." I held it carefully, as if the paper itself might shatter. $400,000. A sum large enough to promise stability, but also a sum that felt like a price placed on decades of memory. Helen's voice softened. "You don't have to go back if you don't want to. I can deliver the keys myself." But I shook my head. "Number, I need to see it. One last time." The next morning, I walked through the front door of Cedar Street with Helen beside me. Dust lingered in the air, faint sunlight spilling through curtains Caroline had chosen years earlier. The house was empty now, stripped of furniture, laughter, and betrayal. The walls echoed with nothing but the sound of my shoes on the hardwood. I paused in the entryway, my hand brushing the frame of the door where Robert used to hang his coat. For a moment, I could almost hear the weight of it sliding from his shoulders, smell the faint trace of pipe tobacco clinging to the fabric. I whispered his name under my breath, a prayer and a farewell at once. In the living room, I saw the outline of where our old sofa had sat. I remembered the night Robert and I carried it in, laughing because it barely fit through the doorway. I remembered Caroline as a little girl, curled up on those cushions, begging for one more bedtime story. That sofa was gone now, but the echoes remained, layered in memory. I walked into the kitchen, the place where my collapse had begun. The tiles looked the same, cool and pale, though the room felt emptied of breath. I traced my hand along the counter where I once taught Caroline to roll out cookie dough, where Robert brewed coffee before dawn, and I remembered the sharp sting of betrayal, the caption mocking me while I lay in a hospital bed. The same kitchen that once fed love had become a stage for cruelty. We climbed the stairs, the air cooler on the second floor. My steps slowed as I approached the hallway wall. There, faint but still visible, were pencil marks etched over the years. Caroline's height, measured year by year, always with Robert's steady hand holding the ruler straight. Beside each line, I had written the date. Age 6, age 9, age 12. A family history carved into drywall. I pressed my palm against it, letting my fingers trace the uneven grooves. My throat tightened. Not the house, I whispered, but the people I entrusted it to. That was the betrayal. Helen said nothing, only let the silence stretch, heavy but necessary. I stepped into the master bedroom. The room was bare now, but I could still picture the quilt Robert's mother had sewn, folded neatly at the foot of our bed. I saw the lamp he always left on for me when I worked late at the library, its warm glow welcoming me home. The memory hurt, but it also comforted. The house had been loyal in its own way. The betrayal had never come from wood or stone. It had come from flesh and blood. We made our way back downstairs. I lingered in the dining room, my hand resting on the chair rail where Maya had once pressed stickers, giggling at my mock scolding. The image of her at my apartment table working on homework under my care gave me strength. She was the reason I was standing there, closing one door so I could open another. Finally, I stood once more in the entryway. Helen placed the keys in my hand. They felt heavier than the check, heavier than paper had any right to feel. I closed my fingers around them, then slowly opened my palm. One by one, I let the keys drop into Helen's waiting hand. The sound was small, metal against metal, but final. I turned back for one last look. The sunlight caught the floor, painting it gold. In that moment, I understood something I had resisted for years. A house does not hold us. It shelters us. What holds us is the love we choose to protect or to betray. I stepped outside. Helen followed, locking the door behind us. The air was crisp, the street quiet. For a moment, I imagined Caroline and Ethan peeking from the shadows, still clinging to what they had lost. But they were not there. Only memory remained. As I walked down the steps, I whispered to myself, "This house never turned against me. The betrayal came from those I trusted within it." I reached the gate, turned the latch, and let it swing shut. Behind me, the door of Cedar Street closed for the last time. The day after we closed the door on Cedar Street, Maya and I drove north until the city thinned into open fields and the air took on the smell of water. The house we chose sat close to a small lake, low and simple, with weathered shingles and a porch that faced the morning. A narrow dock stretched into the blue like a sentence finally finished. When I turned off the engine, the only sounds were wind in the reeds and the soft ticking of a cooling hood. Maya jumped out first, her sneakers crunching on gravel. "Grandma, look," she said, pointing toward the water. A pair of ducks arrowed past, their wakes drawing two clean lines on the surface. For a long moment, we simply stood and listened. After months of courtrooms and whispers, the quiet felt like a gift handed back. Inside, the rooms were small and honest. Pale walls, wooden floors, a narrow kitchen with a window over the sink. I set my old chipped teacup on the sill, the same cup that had weathered bad news in cold apartments, and it seemed right there, catching the square of light that fell through the glass. An anchor can be porcelain. An anchor can be something you refuse to throw away. We carried our boxes in, not many, clothes, books, photo albums, the quilt that once lived at the end of my bed. Maya claimed the smaller bedroom facing the birch trees. "It looks like a secret," she said, peering out through leaves. We decided to paint before we unpacked. At the hardware store in town, she chose a color called Lake Morning. I chose a softer one called Bread Dough. Yours sounds like comfort, she grinned. Yours looks like beginning, I said. We painted with the windows open. Dragonflies drifted through and out again. Maya rolled blue onto her walls with grand strokes, a constellation of splatters on her forearms. I cut careful lines at the trim, then laughed when she dabbed a dot on the tip of my nose. For the first time in longer than I could measure, laughter came without apology. A breeze lifted the drop cloths. The room smelled of fresh paint and birch, and the possibility of a new shape to an old life. After lunch on the porch, peanut butter sandwiches, sliced apples, Maya pointed to the small patch of soil beneath the kitchen window. "Can we plant something?" We drove back to the nursery and came home with petunias, marigolds, and a rosemary plant that made her giggle when I read the tag aloud. "It is a sign," she declared, pressing the herb into the earth with both hands. I thought of the years I had spent invisible in a house with my name on the deed, of the petition that tried to label me incapable. I brushed soil from my palms and whispered, "Not invisible anymore." We worked until dusk. Birds stitched the sky, the lake turned to pewter, our shadows lengthened across the floorboards. I hung white curtains, the kind that breathe when the window is open. Maya unpacked her books, arranging them by color. Then she lined the sill with smooth stones she had collected at school, small planets orbiting the glass. On a nail beside the kitchen doorway, I hung a frame with 3 photographs. Robert in his corduroy jacket, laughing. A younger Caroline on a carousel, hair flying. Maya at 6, asleep on my shoulder, her hand still clutching a crayon. I stood there a long time. Love is a ledger that holds both debt and mercy. You do not balance it by erasing the line items. You balance it by telling the truth and carrying what remains forward. In the evening, we walked to the end of the dock. The wood was warm beneath my soles. Minnows flickered below like fast commas. Maya leaned over the edge and asked if the stars here would be brighter than in the city. "We will test it tonight," I said. "Science requires evidence." She laughed, then grew serious. "Grandma, will we be happy here?" I thought of the judge's voice, of Ethan looking for a friendly face and finding none, of Caroline's video filmed in my stolen kitchen. I thought of the check folded into my wallet and the simple fact of keys that belonged only to us. "Yes," I said, "happiness is not a place. It is the way a place lets you breathe." The next morning, we built our clubhouse. That is what Maya called the corner of the porch we claimed with 2 chairs, a crate for books, and a blanket folded just so. She worked with tongue-out focus on a small wooden sign she had brought in her backpack, the kind children paint at camp. With careful strokes, she lettered, "Grandma and Maya's Clubhouse. No trouble, Queen allowed." She hung it on a hook by the railing. The words swung slightly in the breeze, bright against the lake. Neighbors came by with small offerings. A woman named June brought muffins and a map of the hiking paths. An older man, Sam, fixed the sticky latch on the screen door and waved away my thanks. Their kindness did not feel like pity. It felt like welcome. Each visit stitched us a little tighter into the fabric of the street. At noon, we planted more. Basil in a tin pail, zinnias by the steps. Maya buried a note in a mason jar beneath the rosemary plant. "Insurance," she said. "If we forget who we are, we can dig up the reminder." I did not ask what she wrote. I understood that some promises grow best in the dark. Inside, the house continued to shape itself around us. In the living room, I placed Robert's guitar on a stand by the window. I could almost hear the soft thrum of strings when the evening wind came through. I set a small basket on the entry table for library cards and lake tags. Structure is a kind of tenderness when the heart is mending. Before dinner, Maya tested the acoustics of her newly painted room by reading aloud from a favorite book. Her voice rang clear. The blue walls held it faithfully. When she finished, she looked at me with a new ease, the look of a child beginning to trust that tomorrow will show up on time. We ate at the little kitchen table. Pasta, cherry tomatoes, grocery store garlic bread that tasted better than its price suggested. I told Maya about the first summer Robert and I spent together on a borrowed lake, how we learned to paddle a canoe without circling, how we burned pancakes and ate them anyway. She asked for the story again while we washed dishes, so I told it slower, letting the water and the memory run. Night fell. The lake caught the moon. On the porch, beneath our new sign, we leaned back and counted stars. When Maya reached 10, she slipped her hand into mine and whispered, "This feels like a beginning." The words moved through me like a steadying hand on the back. I looked at the dark water, at our painted rooms glowing softly behind the screen, at the rosemary plant nodding in the breeze like a private joke with God. I smiled, and the smile felt earned. In the reflection on the window, I saw my face not as a woman erased, but as a woman returned to herself, holding life at the edges and in the middle, both. My eyes lifted. The air tasted clean. Freedom had a quiet sound like water against wood. I never imagined that in the later years of my life, I would stand in front of a room full of strangers and speak about survival. Yet here I was, at a small conference hall organized by the Regional Center for the Prevention of Elder Abuse. The podium was simple, the audience filled with social workers, caregivers, and other women and men who carried their own invisible scars. When they introduced me as a survivor, my heart beat harder. Survivor was a word I once thought belonged only to wars or disasters. But maybe that is what betrayal inside your own family feels like. A private war, a disaster with no warning sirens. I placed my notes on the stand, though I did not look at them. Instead, I spoke from memory, from the ache that had shaped itself into clarity. "My name is Rosemary Whitfield," I began. For years, I believed that silence was love, that allowing my daughter and her husband to use my home was a kindness, that overlooking small betrayals was what mothers do, until one day I collapsed in my own kitchen. And while doctors called my daughter, she never came. My son-in-law celebrated online, calling me the trouble queen. There was a hush in the room. Some people leaned forward, others lowered their eyes. I continued, steady but without bitterness. I discovered more than absence. I found financial fraud, loans in my name, plans to strip me of my independence under the excuse of guardianship. They wanted not just my home, but my voice, my place in the world. I paused, but I fought, not with rage, not with noise, but with quiet persistence, with the help of friends who believed me, with the truth written on paper, and with the strength I did not know I still had. A woman in the front row nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. Another man clenched his jaw as though holding back his own story. "I stand here not to curse them," I said. "They will face their consequences. I stand here because stories like mine are more common than many want to believe. Elder abuse hides behind polite dinners and family photos. It wears the mask of concern. It convinces us that being erased is somehow our fault. But I tell you this, being called trouble is not shameful when trouble is the only way to reclaim yourself." I let the silence breathe, then repeated slowly so the words would anchor. They called me Trouble Queen. But sometimes, causing trouble is the only way to find yourself again. Applause rose, not loud or theatrical, but steady and respectful, like waves reaching the shore. I stepped down from the podium, lighter than when I had walked up. Later that evening, back at the lake house, I told Maya about the meeting. She was sitting on the porch, her homework spread out beside a cup of cocoa. She listened, her chin propped on her hand, her eyes shining with a mix of sadness and pride. "Grandma," she asked, "were you scared to tell them?" Yes, I admitted, lowering myself into the chair beside her. But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the choice to speak even when your voice shakes. She smiled, scribbled a star in the corner of her notebook, and said, "Then you're the bravest person I know." We sat together as the sun slipped toward the horizon. The lake reflected orange and gold. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and rosemary from the plant by the steps. Maya leaned her head against my shoulder. The weight was light but certain, a promise between generations. I thought of Robert again, and Caroline, and all the nights when silence felt easier than truth. I thought of the courtroom, of the gavel, of the keys to Cedar Street falling into Helen's hand. I thought of every step that brought us here, to this porch, to this child who trusted me when others had not. And I realized that closure is not about forgetting. It is about choosing what to carry forward. Maya tilted her face to the fading light. "Do you think we'll be okay now?" I kissed the crown of her head. "We already are." The quiet wrapped around us, not the heavy silence of being erased, but the gentle hush of safety, of belonging, of freedom. Before we say goodbye tonight, I want to speak not just to Maya, but to you, the ones who listen, who carry their own untold stories. If you have lived through something like this, I invite you to share. Was I right to fight the way I did? Or was I wrong? Tell me what you think, because these stories grow stronger when we hold them together. And before you go, we would love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, in healing, and in second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you are ready to open your heart. The sun dipped, painting the lake in fire. Maya lifted the wooden sign she had painted and placed it on the porch rail. Grandma and Maya's clubhouse. No trouble, Queen allowed. She giggled, and I laughed with her, my chest lighter than it had been in years. I looked out across the water, the horizon wide and clear, my hand resting on hers. For the first time in so long, my eyes reflected not sorrow, but freedom.